He stood frozen in the doorway of the playroom, his key still cold in his hand. His 5-year-old twins were curled on the sofa, listening with rapt attention, and their nanny was reading to them from a small, leather-bound book, the private, unpublished diary of his late wife. It was a sacred violation of trust, a crossing of a line he never dreamed anyone would cross. But what he was about to hear would unravel a secret his wife had kept hidden until the day she died. This was Ethan Chase, a man who built a billion-dollar tech empire from nothing after the tragic loss of his wife, Claire. For 3 years, he preserved her private journal as a sacred relic, a final piece of her he could not bear to open. Now, a 28-year-old caregiver named Sophia had unilaterally decided to breach that vault, exposing their children to a raw, unedited version of a mother they barely remembered. What she found inside would force Ethan to question everything he thought he knew about the woman he loved and the life they had shared. Ethan's world had been built on 2 pillars, his relentless ambition and Claire's steady, grounding love. Her death from a sudden, aggressive illness 3 years prior didn't just shatter his heart, it severed the only tether keeping his ruthless business instincts in check. He coped the only way he knew how, by working harder, building higher, and distancing himself from the painful, quiet emptiness of his own home. The twins, Liam and Emma, were just 2 years old when they lost their mother. Their memories of her were faint, sensory impressions, a scent of lavender, the sound of a lullaby, a feeling of safety. Ethan, paralyzed by his own grief and terrified of saying the wrong thing, had failed to give them more. He provided everything material, a sprawling mansion, the best toys, private preschool, but he couldn't give them stories. He couldn't give them her voice. That's why he hired Sophia. She came highly recommended from an elite agency, her resume a list of impeccable references from other wealthy families. She was warm, patient, and intuitively understood children. Most importantly to Ethan, she asked thoughtful questions about Claire. She wanted to know what foods she liked, what music she played, how she might have handled a tantrum. To Ethan, it felt like a lifeline. Here was someone who could help keep Claire's spirit alive in the house, who could bridge the gap he was too wounded to cross. He gave her access to the family archives, photo albums, home videos, and though he never explicitly discussed it, the locked glass cabinet in his study where Claire's most personal effects were preserved. The small, leather-bound diary with the floral embossing was the centerpiece. He had found it in her bedside drawer after the funeral. He never opened it. To him, it was a sealed tomb, a space that belonged solely to her. His love for her, riddled with guilt and regret, felt unworthy of its pages. For Sophia, the diary presented a different kind of object. She saw 2 children grieving a ghost, and a father who had turned their mother into a silent, perfect saint. In her professional opinion, this wasn't healthy. She believed children could handle complex truths about the people they love. She had studied child development and had seen the power of narrative in helping kids process loss. One rainy afternoon, with Ethan at a critical overseas board meeting, she made a decision. She used the small key Ethan kept in his desk, the one for important documents, and opened the cabinet. She took the diary to the cozy playroom, sat Liam and Emma down, and began to read. She wasn't being malicious. In her mind, she was performing an act of therapeutic intimacy, giving the children the mother their father couldn't. First entries were sweet, mundane, descriptions of early motherhood, the exhausting joy of twins, funny things the Barbies did. The children listened, enchanted by the sound of their mother's inner voice. But diaries, by their nature, descend past the surface. Claire wrote of her loneliness. She described Ethan's late nights at the office, his distracted presence even when he was home, his growing obsession with the next deal, the next acquisition. She wrote of feeling like a single parent in a gilded cage. Sophia read these passages with a sinking feeling, but she pressed on, believing that even this honesty was a form of love. Then she turned a page and read an entry dated just 6 months before Claire's diagnosis. The children, not fully understanding the words but sensing a shift in Sophia's tone, grew still. The entry described a profound moment of doubt. It wasn't about the children, it was about her marriage. Claire wrote that she felt she had lost the man she married to his ambition, that she sometimes lay awake wondering if they had made a mistake building a life that felt so empty at its core. She wrote one searing line, "I love him, but I don't know if I like the person he's becoming, and I worry the children will only ever know that version of him." It was at that exact moment that Ethan's key turned in the front door. His meeting had concluded early, a surprise even to him. He heard Sophia's voice drifting from the playroom, a rhythmic, gentle reading tone. Peering through the cracked door, he saw the book. The specific shade of worn leather, the flash of Claire's handwriting. A cold, violent shock locked his joints. His private sanctuary had been invaded. The absolute trust he had placed in Sophia evaporated in an instant, replaced by a visceral sense of betrayal. This was the scene he walked in on. His command to stop was not loud, but it carried the full force of his shock and fury. Sophia jumped, snapping the diary shut as if it had burned her. The twins looked up, confused by the sudden tension. "Daddy, Sophia is reading Mama's book," Emma said, her small voice mingling pride and uncertainty. Ethan couldn't even look at his children. His gaze was fixed on Sophia, who had gone pale. "Outside, now," he said, his voice dangerously low. He led her not to the kitchen, but to his study, the very room where the violation had originated. He closed the door. "Explain yourself," he demanded. "What gave you the right?" Sophia, though terrified, clung to her professional rationale. "Mr. Chase, Ethan, the children have a right to know their mother. You've made her a mystery. This," she gestured to the diary she still held, "this is her, the real her, the good and the hard parts. Children are resilient. They need truth to grieve properly." "Truth?" Ethan echoed, the word a curse. "You think you, a stranger in my home for 8 months, get to decide what truth my 5-year-old children are ready for? That is not your truth to tell. Those are not your memories to interpret. That book," his voice cracked, "that was the last piece of her that was hers alone, and you turned it into a bedtime story." Ethical breach was absolute. As the research states, a professional nanny's core responsibility is to respect family privacy, to not share personal details without explicit permission. Sophia had crossed from caregiver into arbitrator of family history, but as she stood there, facing his wrath, she realized the deeper problem. She hadn't just shared private thoughts. She had, without context or preparation, introduced a seed of narrative that could alter how these children viewed their parents. She had given them a fragment of a story of a lonely mother and an absent father, and left them alone with it. Ethan reached for the diary. "Give it to me." As she handed it over, a loose, folded piece of paper, thin and fragile, slipped from between the back pages and fluttered to the polished floor. Both of them stared at it. It was clearly old, not part of the bound journal, a letter. Sophia bent to pick it up, but Ethan was faster. He unfolded it with trembling hands. It was not in Claire's handwriting. It was a man's script, bold and unfamiliar. The salutation made the blood drain from his face. "My dearest Claire." The date at the top was from a year before her illness. The first line read, "I know I shouldn't write this, but after seeing you today, I can't stay silent any longer." Ethan's eyes scanned down, his mind refusing to process the words. Phrases leaped out. "A connection I've never felt. The life you deserve, if you ever choose to leave that gilded cage." He looked up at Sophia, whose expression had shifted from defensive guilt to genuine, wide-eyed horror. She had not read this. This was a secret hidden within a secret. The diary's painful honesty was one thing. This was something else entirely. This was evidence of a life parallel to his own, a possibility he had never conceived. The cliffhanger of his marriage, pennied by a stranger. The carefully managed story of his grief, his perfect late wife, and his own failings exploded into a million chaotic pieces. The last line of the letter burned itself into his retina. "Just say the word, and I am yours, always." The study was tomb silent, the only sound the frantic rustle of that single page in Ethan's shaking hands. He read the letter once, twice, a third time, each pass stripping away another layer of the past 3 years. The man's name was signed at the bottom, Daniel. Sophia, witnessing the collapse of her employer's composure in real time, could only whisper, "I am so sorry, I never saw that, I didn't know." Her apology was for the intrusion, but the greater transgression was now owned by a ghost. Ethan didn't hear her. The world had narrowed to the elegant, masculine script. "The life you deserve, if you ever choose to leave." The phrases were not just romantic, they were diagnostic. They were the testimony of an outsider who had seen a crack in the foundation of Ethan's marriage and believed he could offer shelter. Ethan's first primal instinct was rage, not at Daniel, but at Claire. A searing, blasphemous thought. She had betrayed him. She had entertained the affections of another man while he was out building a fortress for their family. But beneath the anger, a more terrifying feeling pooled: recognition. The letter writer described a woman who felt unseen, who carried a quiet sadness. Ethan had seen that woman. He had seen her in the tired smile she gave him over dinner, in the way she stopped asking him about his day because the answer was always about work. He had seen her, and he had chosen, repeatedly, to look away, to dive back into the clear, solvable problems of his business. The letter was not proof of her betrayal, it was proof of his failure. He looked at Sophia, the immediate crisis reasserting itself. "You're fired," he said, the words flat and final. "Pack your things and leave. Now, do not speak to the children." Sophia, tears now streaming down her face, nodded mutely. She had wanted to give the children a mother. She had instead given their father a grenade. As she slipped out of the study, Ethan sank into his chair, the diary and the damning letter side by side on his desk. He had two choices. He could burn them, reseal the tomb, and continue living with the saintly ghost he had created. Or he could open the vault completely and meet the real, complicated woman he had lost. Driven by a pain that overrode his fear, he opened the diary to the beginning. He would read every word. What followed was a sleepless 36-hour descent. The early entries were a joy he had missed: her awe at the positive pregnancy test, her anxiety about being a good mother to twins, her hilarious descriptions of his own clumsy attempts to help. Then, as his company secured its first major round of funding, the tone began to change. "Ethan worked until 2 a.m. again. I left a plate in the warming oven. He didn't come to bed. I ate it for breakfast." Another entry: "The nanny asked me what the children's favorite songs are. I realized I don't know. Ethan would know even less. We've outsourced their memories." The loneliness was palpable, but so was her love for him. She wrote of planning small surprises to reconnect, of her hope that after the next product launch, things would slow down. They never did. Then, about a year and a half before her diagnosis, a new name appeared: Daniel. "Met Daniel at the Community Arts Center today. He's teaching the pottery class I signed up for. So kind. Listened to me talk about the kids for an hour. He's an artist, but also a grief counselor. Interesting combination." The entries became more frequent. Daniel was a safe space. He asked questions about her, not just her role as a mother or a CEO's wife. He remembered the names of her childhood pets. He lent her books. Ethan read, his heart a stone in his chest, as his wife meticulously documented the birth of an emotional affair. She wrote of the guilt she felt for looking forward to Thursday afternoons and of the growing canyon in her own marriage. The pivotal entry came 8 months before the letter was written. "Daniel told me today that he has feelings for me. He said he knows it's wrong, but he can't help it. I didn't know what to say." Part of me was thrilled to be seen that way again, but the larger part of me is devastated, because the person I wish felt that way about me is too busy to notice I exist. Ethan had to stop reading. He put his head in his hands. The narrative was clear. He had created the vacuum Daniel had filled, but the diary didn't end there. In the entries after Daniel's confession, Claire's writing became more resolved, more fierce. "I told Daniel today that nothing can happen, that I love my husband even if he's lost right now, that my children are my world. I told him we can only be friends and only if we maintain strict boundaries." It hurt him. It hurts me too, in a selfish way, but it's right. The letter from Daniel, Ethan now understood, was a last, desperate attempt to change her mind after she had already said no. Claire had never sent a reply. She had simply folded his letter, hidden it away, and resolved to fight for her marriage. This was the revelation that reframed everything. Claire wasn't a secret traitor. She was a loyalist fighting a lonely war. She had chosen him, and he had never shown up for the battle. The final entries, written in the eerie calm before her diagnosis, were plans. She wrote of wanting to take a family vacation, just the four of them, with no phones. She wrote of wanting to have a difficult conversation with Ethan about his work. She never got the chance. The last entry was about the twins losing their first tooth. It ended with, "My beautiful, growing Barbies, and my husband, who I still believe is in there somewhere. I will find him." Ethan closed the book, utterly shattered. The saint was gone, replaced by a hero, a flawed, patient, profoundly strong woman he had failed, and he had just fired the one person who had tried to give her voice back to their children. He walked to the twins' room. They were awake, sitting together on Liam's bed, a picture book between them. "Where is Sophia?" Emma asked, her lower lip trembling. "She had to go away," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Was it because of Mama's book?" Liam asked, his insight terrifying. In that moment, Ethan saw the damage not as a violation of his privacy, but as an interruption of their grief. They had been given a piece of a puzzle with no picture on the box. It was his job to help them assemble it. He made two decisions. First, he would find Daniel. He needed to look the man in the eye, not to confront him, but to understand the part of his wife's life he had abandoned. Second, he would bring Sophia back, but on new terms. He called her. She answered on the first ring, her voice thick with tears. "Come back," he said, "but we do this together. We talk about what to share and when and why. You are not their gatekeeper, you are their guide, and so am I." Sophia returned the next day. The first thing Ethan did was gather them all in the playroom, the diary on the coffee table. He told Liam and Emma that the book was their mother's private thoughts, and that sometimes private thoughts are sad or complicated, but that they are always real. He said Sophia had made a mistake by sharing without him, but that the love in the book was true. Then, with Sophia by his side, he began to read a carefully selected entry about the day they were born. The children listened, curled into his sides. For the first time, he was not just providing for them, he was parenting them. He was leading them through the wilderness of loss. But one ghost remained. Using his corporate resources, it took his assistant less than a day to find Daniel Hartley. He was a licensed therapist with a practice specializing in art and grief, and he still volunteered at the same community center. Ethan didn't call. He drove there, a nervous energy thrumming in his veins. He found Daniel in a sunlit studio, alone, cleaning clay from a wheel. He was younger than Ethan had pictured, with a gentle, watchful face. He looked up as Ethan entered, and after a long moment, a sad recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're Ethan," he said, not as a question. "She showed me pictures. You look just like your son." The conversation that followed was nothing Ethan expected. There was no defensiveness, no triumph. There was only a shared, profound sorrow. Daniel confirmed the diary's account. He had loved Claire, he said, but she had loved her family with a ferocity that ultimately shut him out. "She was the most ethically courageous person I've ever met," Daniel said. "She could have had an affair. I would have taken her in a heartbeat. But she said that would poison the story of her family and that the story was all that mattered." He had written the letter, he admitted, in a moment of weakness after she ended their friendship. He never knew if she read it. Ethan asked the question that had been burning in him. "Did she hate me?" Daniel smiled, a sad, wise smile. "No, she was disappointed. There's a difference. Hate is giving up. Disappointment is a form of hope. She hoped until the very end that you'd come back to her." He then handed Ethan a small, flat box. "She left this with me for safekeeping a few months before she got sick. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should decide if her family needed it. I've been carrying it for 3 years, trying to decide. I think you need it now." Back in his car, Ethan opened the box. Inside was a second, slimmer journal. This one was not a diary of daily life. It was addressed on the first page to my Liam, my Emma, and my Ethan. It was a book of letters, written specifically to each of them to be read at different milestones. Letters for first days of school, for heartbreaks, for weddings. And for Ethan, there was a long letter dated simply, "When you're ready." His hands shook as he read it. "To my husband, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you've found your way to Daniel. That means you're looking for me and for yourself. I'm so glad. I need you to know 3 things. First, I loved you completely, even when it was hard. Second, I forgive you for the distance. I know you were building a legacy for us and I am so proud of you. But third, and most important, stop now. The legacy is not the company. It's Liam and Emma. It's the man they will become because they knew you. Be that man for them, Ethan. The present, attentive, loving man I fell in love with. Don't let your grief for me become another excuse to be absent. I release you from that. Love them. And when you can, love again. You have so much love to give. Don't bury it with me. All my love forever, Claire." Ethan sat in the parking lot for an hour, weeping harder than he had at her funeral. It was a catharsis, a release of 3 years of guilt and frozen grief. He felt for the first time a sense of peace. He had a map written in her hand for how to move forward. He drove home ready to begin, but as he pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed. It was his chief financial officer. The man's voice was strained. "Ethan, we have a serious problem. The board just received an anonymous package. It's copies of pages from what looks like a personal diary, your wife's diary. There are highlighted sections about your neglect and her unhappiness. Someone is alleging that your personal instability and past failings make you unfit to lead the company through the upcoming merger. They're calling for an emergency vote of no confidence. The sanctuary of his car suddenly felt like a trap. The private grief he had just begun to unpack had been weaponized and launched into the heart of his professional life. The battle for his family was just beginning, and now a new war for his empire had just been declared, and he had no idea who had pulled the trigger. The emotional sanctuary of his car evaporated. The intimate, handwritten roadmap from Claire was now a weapon in the hands of a corporate assassin. Ethan's mind, still reeling from grief and revelation, snapped into a different, colder gear: crisis management. "When is the vote scheduled?" he asked his CFO, his voice devoid of all the emotion that had just overwhelmed him. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., came the tense reply. "They're using the emergency governance clause. They claim your judgment is compromised by unresolved personal trauma, and that the diary is evidence of a pattern of instability that makes you a liability for the merger." Ethan ended the call. He didn't drive to the office. He drove home. Sophia was reading to the children in the playroom. He walked in, knelt down, and looked at Liam and Emma. "I have to go handle a big work problem," he said, his voice calm. "Sophia will be with you. I love you." He then motioned for Sophia to follow him to the hall. In a low, urgent tone, he explained the situation. Her face went from confusion to horror. "They have pages from the diary, but the only copy is here. I never scanned anything. I never photographed anything." The look of sheer panic in her eyes convinced him she was guilty of a boundary violation, not corporate espionage. "Someone else was in this house," Ethan stated, "or someone has access to our systems." He retreated to his study, the new epicenter of a dual war. On one screen, he pulled up the security footage from his home system for the past week. On another, he began drafting a counter-strategy for the board. The footage revealed nothing unusual: no break-ins, no mysterious visitors. But it did show something else. Sophia, on the day he fired her, sitting at the kitchen table with her personal laptop open, crying. She was typing furiously. A personal journal entry, an email to a friend. It was impossible to see. It was the only anomaly. He called his head of security. "I need a full digital forensic sweep on the home network, going back 2 weeks. Focus on any external data transfers, large file uploads, or access to the cloud backup of my personal documents." Then he called his most trusted ally on the board, a woman named Margaret who had been an early investor and a friend of Claire. "Margaret, it's Ethan. You've seen the package." "I have," she said, her voice grave. "It's ugly, Ethan. It's not just the diary pages. There's a narrative attached, a psychological profile suggesting your guilt over your wife's death has driven you into a state of impaired decision-making. They're claiming your recent, erratic behavior, which I assume is you actually spending time with your children, is proof." "Who's behind it?" Ethan demanded. Margaret hesitated. "The push is being led by Robert Vance. Vance, the board's most ruthlessly ambitious member, a private equity shark who had always viewed Ethan's sentimental attachment to the company's original mission as a weakness. Vance had been advocating for a more aggressive, slash-and-burn approach to the merger, one Ethan had resisted because it would involve massive layoffs. Eliminating Ethan was the fastest way to get his plan approved. But how did Vance get the diary? The answer came from the security team an hour later. There was no evidence of a hack. However, their sweep showed that the automatic cloud backup on Ethan's personal desktop, which included a scanned, encrypted PDF of Claire's entire diary, a project he'd commissioned in a fit of preservation paranoia a year after her death, had been accessed from an unrecognized device 2 days ago. The access point was traced to a virtual private network, but the login credentials used were Ethan's own. It was an inside job. Someone had his password. He stormed into the kitchen where Sophia was cleaning up after the children's dinner. "My cloud backup was accessed 2 days ago. The diary file. Did you give anyone my password? Did you write it down?" Sophia looked stunned. "No, I don't even know your password." But then her expression changed. She went pale. "The children, last week, you were on a video call in your study. Liam and Emma were playing with my old tablet. It was dead. They wanted to play a game. I didn't want to bother you. I saw your password sticky note stuck under your keyboard. I used it to log into your desktop to download a game for them. I forgot to log out. The tablet was connected to the home Wi-Fi for about an hour." The breach was absurd, mundane, and devastating. A tired nanny trying to placate two children had inadvertently left a gateway open on a tablet with weak security. A sophisticated attacker could have easily infiltrated it and harvested credentials. This wasn't Sophia selling secrets, it was her negligence being exploited. The who was now clear, Robert Vance had the motive. The how was now plausible, but they had no proof. Without proof, showing up at the board meeting and claiming sabotage would look like the desperate deflections of a guilty, unstable man. Ethan had one night. He couldn't prove Vance stole the diary, so he had to undermine the diary's power as a weapon. He stayed up all night, but not reviewing merger documents. He was reading. He read every highlighted passage the board had received. Vance's team had been clever, cherry-picking moments of despair and loneliness, framing them as evidence of Ethan's failure. Ethan prepared a different narrative. He found the entries that came after those dark moments, Claire's resolutions, her plans to reconnect, her unwavering love for her family. He found the final letter Claire had left for him. He would not hide from the pain, he would contextualize it. He would perform the ultimate act of corporate vulnerability. He would tell the truth. The next morning, the boardroom was icy. 10 faces around the polished table, most avoidant, a few glaring. Robert Vance sat with a faint, smug smile. The formal accusations were presented: emotional instability, negligent leadership, a personal life in such disarray it threatened a $10 billion merger. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he didn't reach for a financial report. He placed Claire's slim volume of letters on the table. "You've all seen excerpts from my late wife's private journal," he began, his voice quiet but carrying. "You've seen her pain, her loneliness. What you haven't seen is what came after. You haven't seen her forgiveness. You haven't seen her fight, and you haven't seen her instructions to me." He then did the unthinkable. He read a portion of Claire's final letter to him aloud. "The legacy is not the company, it's Liam and Emma. Be that man for them, Ethan. The present, attentive, loving man I fell in love with." The room was utterly still. He looked at Vance. "You're right, Robert, my judgment has changed. For years, my judgment said the only thing that mattered was this company's valuation. My wife's writing, which you so thoughtfully distributed, showed me I was wrong. My new judgment tells me that a leader who ignores his humanity is a liability. A leader who understands loss, responsibility, and forgiveness is an asset. The merger will proceed. My revised terms will include a $50 million fund to retrain and support any displaced employees, because that is the legacy my wife would have wanted." He then dropped his final card. "And as for the source of this leak, a forensic investigation is underway. When I find out which board member conspired to hack my family's private grief for corporate gain, I will not only remove them from this board, I will see them prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." The vote of no confidence failed spectacularly. Vance left the room first, his face a mask of fury, but Ethan felt no triumph. He had won the battle by exposing his heart, a dangerous precedent, and Vance was still out there, wounded and dangerous. The fallout was immediate, but not from the direction he expected. As he returned to his office, his assistant informed him that a reporter from a major financial publication was on the line. "They're saying they received an anonymous tip about the boardroom drama and the diary scandal. They want a comment." The leak had gone public. The carefully controlled narrative he had presented in the boardroom was now in the hands of the media, who would twist it for clicks. Headlines wrote themselves: "Grieving CEO's leadership questioned over dead wife's diary. Tech titan's marriage secrets spark boardroom coup." His personal tragedy was about to become public spectacle. His children's names would be dragged into it. His company's stock would likely tumble at the opening bell. The victory in the boardroom was instantly nullified by a larger, more insidious attack in the court of public opinion. Robert Vance hadn't just wanted to oust him, he wanted to destroy him, to make him so toxic that the company would have no choice but to eject him to save itself. As Ethan stared at the blinking line of the waiting reporter, he realized the rules had changed once more. He was no longer fighting a corporate rival. He was fighting a smear campaign that used his deepest love as its ammunition. And to protect his family, he would have to step into the spotlight he had always avoided and tell his story before someone else permanently mangled it. The blinking line on his phone was a gateway to the storm. Ethan knew that speaking to the reporter off the cuff would be a disaster, but silence would let Robert Vance's poisoned narrative become the only truth. He made a calculated decision. He had his assistant schedule a single, on-the-record interview with a respected business journalist for the following afternoon. He would not run from the story, he would try to control it. But first, he had to go home. He had to warn his children. He found Sophia in the playroom, her face etched with anxiety from the news alerts already trickling in. The twins were building a complex block tower, oblivious. "We need to talk," Ethan said, his voice low. He explained the situation in simple terms to Liam and Emma, that some people at his work were being mean, and that they might see Mommy's name in the news, and that it was very important they talk to him or Sophia if they heard anything confusing. Emma, with a solemnity that mirrored her mother, asked, "Did the mean people read her book too?" The question cut to the core. "Yes, honey," Ethan admitted. "They did, and they're using it to tell lies." Liam, not looking up from his blocks, said quietly, "Then we have to tell the truth louder." The wisdom from his 5-year-old son was the final push. That night, instead of rehearsing corporate talking points, Ethan sat with Sophia and the twins. He asked them what they thought Mommy would want people to know. Emma said that she loved us more than anything. Liam added, and that she made the best pancakes. It was a child's truth, simple and unassailable. Ethan realized his public defense couldn't be about boardroom maneuvers or legal threats. It had to be about those pancakes. It had to be about love. The next day, he walked into the interview not as a besieged CEO, but as a grieving husband and a determined father. The journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Alana, began with the expected hardball: the boardroom coup, the allegations of instability, the leaked diary. Ethan didn't deflect. He said, "The diary is real. My wife's pain was real. My failure to see that pain while I was building a company is the greatest regret of my life. The man in those early pages deserved to be questioned. But the man I became after losing her, the man trying to learn from her words how to be a father to our children, that man is more stable, more focused, and more humane than the driven CEO I was before." He then did something unprecedented. He shared Claire's concept of the story. He explained that she believed the narrative of a family was its most sacred possession, and that the leaked pages were a vandalism of that story. He didn't mention Vance by name, but he spoke of a mentality that sees human vulnerability only as weakness to be exploited. He announced the $50 million employee transition fund not as a merger term, but as a clause written in my wife's handwriting on my heart. He ended by looking directly into the camera, his voice softening. "To anyone who sees a story of scandal in this, I would ask you to look deeper. This is a story about a remarkable woman whose words are still teaching me how to live. It's about second chances. And it's about the fact that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs don't happen in a lab, but in a playroom, listening to your children build a block tower." The interview aired that evening. The response was not the corporate catastrophe Vance had banked on. While the stock dipped initially on the uncertainty, a remarkable thing happened. Employee morale, which had been sinking under the merger fears, skyrocketed. Thousands of employees shared messages of support, many sharing their own stories of loss and family. Customers voiced their approval. The narrative flipped from unstable CEO to human leader learning from grief. The board, sensing the shift in public sentiment, closed ranks around Ethan. Robert Vance was officially censured and, facing the looming forensic audit and potential legal action, resigned from the board entirely. His smear campaign had backfired spectacularly, proving Ethan's point about the toxicity of his worldview. With the corporate war won, Ethan's real work began. He scaled back his hours dramatically, implementing a co-CEO structure to ensure the company thrived without consuming his life. His new office was often the playroom floor. He and Sophia established a careful, collaborative routine. They used Claire's letters as a curriculum, reading the appropriate ones to the children as milestones arrived. The diary was not hidden away, but treated with reverence. A book they would explore together in small doses as the children grew older and could understand more complex emotions. Sophia, having lived through the firestorm her initial action caused, evolved from a well-intentioned intruder into a truly integrated part of the family's healing, her guilt transformed into fierce, loyal protection. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the public storm, Ethan took the children to the community arts center. Daniel was there, teaching a children's clay class. It was a planned yet delicate meeting. Liam and Emma, armed with the knowledge that this was a friend of Mommy's who did art, were shy but curious. Daniel was gracious and warm, focusing entirely on helping them make little pottery animals. Watching them, Ethan felt no lingering jealousy, only a profound gratitude. This man had offered his wife kindness when he had not. After the class, as the children showed Sophia their creations, Ethan and Daniel shared a quiet moment. "Thank you," Ethan said, "for giving her that box. It changed everything." Daniel nodded. "She would be glad it found you when you were ready." There was a peace between them, a shared love for Claire that no longer felt like a contest, but a shared vigil. Life settled into a new, richer rhythm, but the story had one final, quiet revelation. On the anniversary of Claire's passing, Ethan took the children to her favorite spot by the lake. They released flowers and shared their favorite memories. That night, as he was putting Emma to bed, she hugged him extra tight and whispered, "I talked to Mama today at the lake." "You did, sweetie? What did you say?" Ethan asked. Emma pulled back, her eyes serious in the dim light. "I told her thank you for writing the book, and I told her that you learned how to be present, and that we're okay." Ethan's breath caught. He had never used that phrase with them, learned how to be present. It was language from Claire's final letter to him, a letter the children had never heard. Later, while double-checking the shelved diary, he found it. Tucked in the back, in Claire's handwriting on a separate scrap of paper, was a note he had missed. It was addressed to the children. It read, "To my darlings, if you are reading this with your daddy, it means he learned how to be present. And that is the best gift he could ever give you and me. All my love, Mama." She had foreseen it. She had hoped for this exact outcome and left a breadcrumb for her children to find, confirming their father's transformation. The violation of the diary's privacy had led through a labyrinth of pain, public scandal, and personal upheaval, only to deliver him and his children to this moment of perfect, whispered closure. The sacred boundary had been broken, but in the breaking, a deeper connection had been forged, not just to the memory of Claire, but to the living, breathing family she left behind. Ethan had arrived home unannounced that fateful day and found a betrayal. But what he ultimately discovered was an unexpected, merciful gift, the roadmap home to himself, written in the hand of the woman who never stopped believing he would find it. Ethan Chase's story forces us to confront a difficult, beautiful paradox about the private legacies we leave behind. We often think of privacy as a wall, a final boundary between our inner selves and the world. But what if, in some cases, that privacy becomes a prison for those who love us? Claire's diary was a sealed vault of her truest self, her doubts, her loneliness, her unwavering hope. Its violation was a profound ethical breach, a shattering of trust. Yet in the broken pieces, Ethan and his children found a more complete mosaic of the woman they lost. They didn't find a saint, they found a human being, and in her humanity, they found permission for their own. The research into grief tells us that children need coherent narratives to process loss. They need to understand that the people they love were complex, that love itself can exist alongside frustration and disappointment. By trying to protect his children from any shadow in Claire's memory, Ethan had inadvertently given them a ghost. Sophia, though her methods were undeniably wrong, instinctively knew that children can handle more truth than we think. The real failure was not in the desire to share, but in the lack of a guided, consensual framework. The healing began only when Ethan stepped in as the curator of his wife's story, blending her words with his own presence. This raises an uncomfortable question for all of us. What do we do with the private writings of those we've lost? Do we honor their secrecy, or do we weigh the potential for understanding against the risk of pain? There is no universal answer, as the experts stated. The decision rests on the delicate balance between respecting a person's final privacy and the living family's need for closure. Perhaps the lesson is not in choosing one over the other, but in understanding that the deepest truths are not always found in the words alone, but in the courage it takes to face them together. Ethan's journey from a detached billionaire to a present father was not triggered by success, but by catastrophic emotional failure. The corporate betrayal, the public shamming, the intimate violation, each was a furnace that burned away the persona he had built. What remained was the core Claire had always seen, a man capable of great love who had simply lost his way. Her diary was not an indictment, it was a map back to himself. And the final, hidden note to the children was her last act of grace, a signal from beyond that he had finally arrived at the destination she always believed he could reach. We all carry sealed chapters within us and within the people we love. The fear of what those chapters contain can keep us locked in shallow, safe narratives. But Ethan and Liam and Emma discovered that sometimes the greatest gifts are hidden in the pages we're most afraid to turn. They learned that love is not diminished by complexity, it is deepened by it, and that redemption is rarely a grand, sweeping event, but a series of small, brave choices to show up, to listen, and to be present. If this story of a broken boundary and an unexpected gift resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to join us for more journeys into the heart of the human experience. Until next time.